For decades, the world knew him as one man, James Bond. He was the definitive image of masculine cool, a suave and indestructible super spy who moved through a world of danger and luxury with effortless grace. But behind the perfectly tailored tuxedo and the iconic confident smirk lived a completely different person. This was a man who grew to resent the very role that made him a global superstar, a fiercely private individual who battled producers, the press, and his own internal demons. He held views so shocking they threatened to shatter his legacy forever. For years, his closest friend, the legendary actor Michael Caine, stayed silent, protecting the secrets of the man he knew. Now, the full story of the real Sean Connery is finally coming to light, exposing a figure far more complex, troubled, and controversial than anyone ever imagined. Long before he ordered martinis shaken, not stirred, Sean Connery was simply Thomas Connery, a boy from the gritty working-class slums of Edinburgh, Scotland. His childhood home at 176 Fountain Bridge was a world away from the glamorous locations of his future films. It was a cold water flat with no hot water, and a toilet shared with other families, a building later torn down. His father, Joseph, worked in a factory and drove a truck, while his mother, Effie, was a cleaner. Life was hard, and from a young age he was known not as the suave Sean, but as Big Tam, a tough, lanky kid who towered over his peers. To help his family make ends meet, he took on any job he could find, no matter how grim. He delivered milk, worked as a bricklayer, and even polished coffins. A stark and morbid task for a young man who would one day become a symbol of vibrant life. He even worked as a nude model for art students, an early sign of the comfort he had in his own skin, but also a reflection of his desperate need for money. This was a life of pure survival, and it forged a man who was deeply grounded, relentlessly pragmatic, and completely unimpressed by the superficial glamour he would later encounter. His path into the world of acting was not a dream he pursued, but a door he stumbled through by accident. After a brief stint in the Royal Navy, where he served aboard the HMS Formidable, he was medically discharged at 19 due to recurring stomach ulcers, a painful condition that ran in his family. Looking for direction, he threw himself into bodybuilding, sculpting the powerful physique that would become his trademark. It was this hobby that inadvertently launched his career. In 1953, while in London for a Mr. Universe competition, he heard about auditions for a stage production of South Pacific. Needing the cash, he gave it a shot and, to his own surprise, landed a small role as a chorus boy. It was just a gig, a way to pay the bills, but it set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. He was ambitious even then, and by the time the tour reached his hometown, he had been promoted to a featured role, taking over a part from a then unknown Larry Hagman. But it was the Bond role that would truly define him, a role he almost didn't get. When producer Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were casting for Dr. No, Sean Connery was not on their radar. In fact, the creator of James Bond, Ian Fleming, was actively against him. Fleming famously called Connery an overgrown stuntman, believing the rough-and-tumble Scotsman lacked the polish and sophistication for his creation. Wanted a debonair star like Cary Grant. But the producers knew Grant would be too expensive and would only commit to one film. It was the producer's wife, Dana Broccoli, who saw past the rough exterior. She urged her husband to watch Connery's screen test, insisting he possessed a raw, magnetic animalism that would make Bond unforgettable. After an arrogant, swaggering audition, Connery got the part. To mold him into the gentleman spy, director Terence Young took him under his wing, taking him to his own tailor for bespoke suits, introducing him to fine dining, and teaching him how to walk and talk with the effortless confidence of the upper class. Connery was a quick study, and his transformation was so complete that after seeing Dr. No, a stunned Ian Fleming actually rewrote Bond's personal history, giving the character a Scottish father as a tribute to the actor he once dismissed. The global explosion of Bond mania after the film's release was immediate and overwhelming. Sean Connery went from a struggling actor to the most famous man on the planet overnight. But the fame he had stumbled into quickly became a prison. He was mobbed in the streets, hounded by the press, and lost any semblance of a private life. During a trip to Japan, he was famously followed into a public bathroom by photographers. The constant attention was suffocating for the intensely private Scotsman, who began to view the character of James Bond as an enemy. This frustration was compounded by bitter and public battles with the producers over his salary. While they were making a fortune, he felt he was being drastically underpaid for creating a billion-dollar franchise. The resentment festered until he couldn't hide it anymore. In one famous interview, he bluntly stated, "I have always hated that damn James Bond. I'd like to kill him." But as he was drowning in the pressures of fame, one person understood his struggle. In the shallow and transactional world of Hollywood, genuine friendships are a rarity. For Sean Connery, his lifelong bond with fellow actor Michael Caine was an anchor. They met long before either of them were superstars. Two working-class guys from opposite ends of the UK, trying to make it in a world that wasn't built for them. They understood each other's fight, their shared contempt for phoniness, and the dizzying absurdity of fame. Caine saw the real Sean, the man behind the mask, who was struggling with being turned into a global commodity. Their friendship was solidified during the grueling shoot of The Man Who Would Be King in Morocco. As a terrifying sandstorm approached the set, the cast and crew began to panic. Caine recalled Connery turning to him with a calm smile and saying, "Don't worry, Michael, we're insured. The worst that can happen is we die, and we'll die millionaires." It was a moment that perfectly captured Connery's unflappable, pragmatic nature, a side of him the public rarely saw. However, as his fame soared, a much darker aspect of Connery's personality began to surface publicly. In a now infamous 1965 interview with Playboy magazine, he made a series of deeply troubling statements. When asked about violence against women, he shockingly replied, "I don't think there is anything particularly wrong about hitting a woman. If she is a beach, or hysterical, or bloody-minded continually, then I do it." Comments were stunning, suggesting a mindset that was violently at odds with his heroic screen persona. Worse, it wasn't a one-time mistake. 2 decades later, in a 1987 interview with Barbara Walters, he was given a chance to retract his words. Instead, he doubled down, arguing that an open-handed slap could be justified if all other options failed. These repeated comments painted a deeply disturbing picture, and they would come back to haunt him in the most damaging way possible. The controversy reached a boiling point years later, when his first wife, Australian actress Diane Cilento, released her autobiography. In the book, shocking accusations surfaced about their turbulent 11-year marriage. She alleged that Connery had been not just mentally, but physically abusive, claiming he had once struck her during a jealous rage. While Connery furiously denied the claims, they gained traction because they seemed to align perfectly with the troubling views he had expressed publicly for decades. The fallout was immense. The public backlash was so severe that in 2006, he was forced to cancel a high-profile appearance at the Scottish Parliament. The man who was once Scotland's greatest pride had become a source of national embarrassment. Reputation was in tatters. He later attempted to clarify his position, telling a newspaper he was completely against abuse of any kind. But for many, the damage was already done. It was too little, too late. By the early 2000s, Sean Connery was tired. He was tired of the industry, tired of the roles, and tired of the game. The final decisive blow came during the chaotic and miserable production of the 2003 film The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The entire experience was a nightmare. He clashed relentlessly with the director, Stephen Norrington, with stories of on-set screaming matches becoming Hollywood legend. Connery reportedly called the director a madman and tried to salvage the film in the editing room, but it was a disaster. Bombed with critics and audiences, a humiliating final entry on a legendary filmography. Connery, it was the last straw. The film represented everything he had grown to hate about the modern movie business. In a final, fiery interview, he declared he was officially quitting acting because the industry was now being run by idiots who only cared about making sequels and comic book movies. He walked away from multi-million-dollar deals, including a massive offer to return for a 4th Indiana Jones film, and he never looked back. After abruptly ending his career, Sean Connery vanished from public life. He and his second wife, the painter Micheline Roquebrune, retreated to their secluded home in the Bahamas, creating a fortress of privacy against the world he had left behind. It was there, far from the cameras and the sycophants, that he finally found the peace he had been searching for his entire life. Few people knew that he dedicated his retirement to painting. It was a private passion, a quiet and meditative act that allowed him to express himself without the pressure of public opinion. According to Michael Caine, this tranquil, creative life was the one his friend had always wanted. He traded Hollywood premieres for quiet days on the golf course and hours in his art studio. His wife lovingly called his paintings silent confessions, a way for him to process a life of extraordinary highs and crushing lows. He had finally escaped the legend of James Bond to simply be Sean. In the final years of his life, Sean Connery faced one last tragic battle. He was diagnosed with dementia, a cruel and unforgiving illness that slowly chipped away at the sharp mind and fierce intellect he was known for. In a final act of love and protection, his wife Micheline cared for him herself, shielding him from the public eye so he could live out his days with the dignity he deserved. On October 31st, 2020, at the age of 90, he passed away peacefully in his sleep at his home in the Bahamas, the end he would have chosen for himself, on his own terms. His death left the world to grapple with an unsettled and deeply complex legacy. Who was the real Sean Connery? Was he the groundbreaking cultural icon who defined masculinity for a generation, or a deeply flawed man whose troubling views and private demons cannot be ignored? The truth is he was both. A working-class boy who became a king, and a king who desperately wanted to be a normal man, leaving us to forever debate where the icon ends and the man begins. Only 0.4% of people watching are subscribed. You've stayed this long. Let's fix that.